Time for the last Momonosuke video. And then I have the Hiyori videos, and then I'm done on Wano for a while. So, grown up Momonosuke. That'll be fun. So, where I left off at the end of the previous one for this was Momonosuke had Shinobu age him up, use her mature mature ability to age him up by 20 years, to mature him by 20 years. Which she did. And we kind of ended it with like Luffy walking over after he had gotten his fill from all the food from Caribou. And we have like this huge, like there's this smoke, dust cloud around Momonosuke, and we see these two eyes, eye shines coming through. And as the smoke clears, we see this huge dragon that looks exactly like Kaido, except they're pink. We get this big dramatic moment, and it's just like Shinobu is crying because she's like, he looks just like, and it's like okay, well, this, like, we don't see Momonosuke's adult form for a little while. We don't see it for several chapters, for a good chunk of chapters, until after Onigashima has been, landed, and Kaido's defeated and all of that stuff. So what ends up happening is we're like, okay, well, what does he look like as a human? And it's just like, we kind of assumed he was probably going to look like Kaido as a dragon, except like pink instead of blue, given the circumstances of what we understand of the, artificial zone, mythical zone that Vegapunk made. Perfectionist that he is. And that's what it was. And Momonosuke is just this huge, intimidating looking dragon. But he is also still, he's physically 28 years old. He is also still mentally 8 years old. And he is still very scared as to what's going on, but he's like, I have to do this. I have to be brave. And we see that, like, we see him kind of not necessarily regress throughout the rest of this whole section, because he is stepping up. He is like, okay, Luffy needed me to get bigger. I needed to be able to fly Luffy up here, and I couldn't do that before when I was small. But now I'm the age that I am physically supposed to be, chronologically supposed to be, and now I'm a big freaking dragon, and I can help Luffy better now. And that is essentially like what Momonosuke is going for. And he kind of stays in that mindset for a good chunk of the rest of this time frame. And, like, of course, we see him interact with, Yamato during this time frame and different things like that, where we're seeing a bunch of this other stuff with, like, him, he's going to have his own ordeal that he has to deal with here, and a few other moments where he has to summon up his courage that he's going to have to deal with here, which is perfectly understandable. As I said, Momonosuke, like, the whole time that we know Momonosuke throughout the course of the story as the reader, even with all the flashbacks and everything, it's a good chunk of chapters, yes, and we learn a bit about him, but from, like, as the readers, we spend years with Momonosuke, just like we spend years with all the Straw Hats and everything else like that. But for Momonosuke, like, everything that happened with Kaido and his father's death and his mother's death and the burning of his home and being separated from his sister and sent in the future, all of that happened like 6 months ago for him. As I keep harping on, because that's a very important thing when it comes to Momonosuke. It's like, if you were 8 years old and all of that crap happened to you, your dad's executed, boiled alive, killed by a psychotic despot ruler of your country, your castle, your home is being burned around you, your, giant evil dragon man has shown up and is holding you over the balcony, ready to kill you if you're going to claim that you are Kozuki Oden's son, and everything else like that, and your mom's going to send you into the future, and you're not going to see your sister for a long time, and, all this other stuff, and you are 8 years old, and you are terrified. And you get to the future, and you find out your country is much worse off than it was when you left 20 years ago. And now it's like, oh no, now what's going to happen? And then, like, you go through all of these other harrowing ordeals, trying to get to Zoe, getting separated, getting stuck on Dressrosa, getting terrified by Doflamingo, getting, locked up in Punk Hazard, finding the devil fruit, falling down the trash chute, all that stuff. And, like, I love the fact that, like, as the reader, we meet Momonosuke at what is essentially his lowest. He is in the bottom of the trash chute, in the trash dump, where Luffy finds him, and that's where we're really introduced to Momonosuke as the character. We're kind of introduced to, like, him as a concept earlier because of Kinemon, and because of the other kids, but this is where we truly interact with him, where he's not just, like, a silhouette. And I love that. And, like, so we go through all of that. And then all of this is literally Momonosuke's arc throughout the entire setup of Punk Hazard, Dressrosa, Zoe, technically Whole Cake Island, but he's not involved in Whole Cake Island. And then Wano is him going through all of this crap. And yeah, he's not super involved in Dressrosa, but there's a little bit that happens there for him. But, like, all of this stuff that he goes through, and it's the majority of it is in Wano, yes. But, like, we see him build his confidence and build his courage in wanting to fight for his country, wanting to protect his people. And we see him go from being this little kid who's terrified of Kaido, and I keep harping on this because it's a very important thing when it comes to Momonosuke. And it's the thing that I love how Oda depicts it. And the anime does a really good job of it, too. Because, and, they go through so much of that. And Momonosuke, we see him grow so much as a character. We see him act like this brat toward Luffy because that's kind of what he was in the beginning, was kind of this little bit of, not a wholly spoiled brat, but a little bit of, like, an entitled one. And then we see him shift through that. And yes, having Luffy kind of there as, like, that big brother figure that, like, Luffy ends up being for Momonosuke and Tama. Having that, bond there and everything, and having Momonosuke realize that Luffy doesn't care that you're royalty. Luffy's going to treat you based on the way you treat him and the way he sees you treat other people. And that's what happens. And, Luffy helps Momonosuke and all this other stuff, and the other Straw Hats are there, and the Scabbards are there, and the Minks are there, and everything else. And then Yamato comes into the picture. And Momonosuke has seen the type of leader that he's going to have to be at this point in time. He saw glimpses of it at Udon, and he's seen it when it came to, when he had to choose to let Kanjuro take him so they could get to Onigashima properly to be able to do the raid. And, when he's, shouted his name that I am Kozuki Momonosuke to Kaido and everything else like that. And we're going to have another moment like that here in a little bit. And, like, so we, I harp on that because it's a very important thing. And you may find it annoying, but I think it's important. So, Momonosuke is there in his giant dragon form. Luffy is looking at him and it's like, okay, now we gotta get up to the flying Onigashima in the sky. And Momonosuke is like, okay. He's terrified at this moment. And Luffy, like, climbs on top of Momonosuke and is, like, standing on his head or between his horns, which is just so funny. Because it's the exact reverse. I love it. And Luffy's like, okay, we're gonna go up there. And Momonosuke is like, okay. And he's, like, still sitting there with his, like, eyes closed as he's terrified. And it, like, Luffy kind of has to convince, like, come on, Momonosuke, you have to fly. You have to fly to get up there. You're going to need to use your flame clouds to get up there. And so it's like, it turns into Momonosuke having to summon up his courage to start getting up, flying, getting onto the flame clouds, and making his way up toward Onigashima. And because, of course, Momonosuke is still rightfully terrified of heights, he kind of, it's kind of jittery at first. For eventually they do end up getting up to Onigashima. And then they end up kind of crashing through the Skull Dome. And, like, they crash into various floors, which just everyone is just like, oh my god, what is going on here? It's a giant pink dragon. And some people are like, oh my god, it's Kaido. Why is he pink? And then, you know, just like, the Straw Hats probably figured out pretty quickly that this is Momonosuke, because it's just like, giant pink dragon. Wait a second, okay, that's Luffy, that's Momonosuke. Got it. Type of a thing, if they notice Luffy at all. Well, like, Momonosuke causes some chaos in that regard. Eventually, you know, still panicking, Luffy is kind of able to help Momonosuke kind of level off, and they're able to see Kaido on the roof, where Kaido is currently fighting Yamato. And this ends up resulting in Luffy jumping down and using one of his attacks that hits Kaido simultaneously with one of Yamato's attacks. Kaido then ends up going into his beast form because he's like, okay, you guys are kind of fun here. And so he's gone back into his dragon form. And Luffy, like, is like, go on, Momo, bite Kaido. Momonosuke, you want me to do what now? And I love that moment, but, like, it's like, think about all the crap this guy has put you through, Momonosuke. And now you're at least big enough where it's kind of like the pick on somebody your own size. I didn't mean me moment, but pick on someone your own size. And Momonosuke, like, summons up his courage again. And he thinks about all the crap Kaido's put him through. And he just bites Kaido on the side. And Kaido is like, what the F are you doing? I mean, like, it does kind of hurt Kaido. Because, like, it's a dragon biting another dragon. And then Momonosuke declares himself as, you know, I am Kozuki Momonosuke. I am the man who will become the Shogun of Wano. And he makes that declaration. And that's when Kaido is realizing, oh, this is the kid from earlier. Something happened to this kid. Now it's the kid from earlier. Something happened to him and he's big now. To be fair, I don't think Kaido knew about Momonosuke being able to turn into a dragon. I don't think prior to this moment Kaido knew about that. Because, unless I'm missing something, I don't think Kaido and Momonosuke ever interacted while Momonosuke was in his dragon form until this moment. And even then, it would have been like the small dragon. So Momonosuke bites Kaido. There ends up being some skirmishes. Luffy and Yamato unleash some attacks on Kaido. I was trying to remember. I don't remember if Momo ends up using any of his attacks here on Kaido. I don't think he uses a Boro Breath on Kaido. I don't think that happens until later when they fight Ryukogyu. But what ends up happening is essentially Luffy is now going to face off against Kaido in another rematch. This is round 1, 2, like what, round 3 or 4 at this point in time. And Momonosuke, Yamato and Momonosuke go off. And they are going to go and work on trying to prevent Onigashima from crashing into the capital and crashing into the flower capital, because that's Kaido's aim. It's like, okay, we're going to drop, Onigashima on top of the flower capital. So what essentially happens is Momonosuke and Yamato are like, okay, we got to figure out a way to stop Onigashima, or at least have to try to pull it away from the flower capital, so if it falls, it's not going to land on the capital. So that's essentially now Momonosuke's task for the rest of this Onigashima section, is him figuring up a way to do this. And he's got Yamato there with him at the, Yamato's there kind of helping Momonosuke, encouraging him and stuff like that. And the thing is that Yamato is actually a really good character to have here with Momonosuke, because Yamato is fairly familiar with what, like, Kaido's powers are, because Yamato has watched Kaido all of their life with this power and been beaten up by Kaido multiple times with this power. So Yamato would have a good amount of understanding of how Kaido's powers would work, meaning that they would, Yamato would then be able to explain to Momonosuke, well, my dad's able to make flame clouds, and that's what he's using to wrap around the island to make the island fly. So if you could put your own flame clouds over his, you should be able to pull it away. And essentially this resulted in Momonosuke trying to, him kind of because he hasn't really mastered any of his abilities yet. He's barely mastered any type of transforming. I freaking hope later on in the series, like if they show up at like Laugh Tale or wherever the final war is going to be, I really want Momonosuke to show up in dragon form at some point, and then also shift into a hybrid form that looks like Kaido's hybrid form, except it's pink, but it's Momonosuke. I want that. I want that. Don't know if that's going to happen, but that would be fun. So what ends up happening is, of course, Momonosuke, Momonosuke is trying to focus on figuring out how to get the flame clouds to work. And there's also a moment in here that I like, because at one point in time, they realize that part of the island is crumbling from all of the attacks that are going on, plus because Kaido is this is kind of an obvious answer that Kaido is taking damage because part of the island is kind of crumbling around them because the flame clouds aren't able to hold it together as much. So they're like, Momonosuke's like, shouldn't we tell Luffy that he has to stop what he's doing for fighting Kaido because it's going to destroy the island? And Yamato just takes out his collarbone and like backs him on the head. Bam! Ow! No, we can't do that because Luffy needs to focus on fighting Kaido. This is the task he gave us, is to try to get, Onigashima so it's not going to crash onto the flower capital. So, during all of that ability, Momonosuke is working on trying to summon up his flame clouds. And he's getting small ones, and eventually he figures out, okay, I can use my flame clouds to attach to Kaido's flame clouds and interact with Kaido's flame clouds, and then try to pull Onigashima away in the opposite direction, or at the very least mitigate whatever additional, however much closer it gets to the flower cap. So that's what Momonosuke kind of works on at that point in time, and he's got Yamato there with him. Eventually, what ends up happening is Yamato mentions something that there is a cache of explosives in Onigashima, and they need to figure out a way to negate the explosives, because should Onigashima fall, those explosives might go off and kill anybody else who might possibly have survived the fall in the first place. Also, we don't know exactly how big this explosion would be. This could also result in damage being done to the flower capital. As has pointed out, the samurai that have gone to Onigashima for this raid, they have essentially already been like, okay, this is our last chance to defeat Kaido. If we die, we die. Type of thing. Clearly, they don't actually want to die. The scabbards don't actually want to die. Samurai honor be damned. And the Straw Hats and the Minks and the Heart Pirates and the Kid Pirates, they don't want to die. None of them want to die. But they do understand that this could be something that could lead to their death. The Straw Hats kind of know this going into almost any battle that they go into, is that this could lead to their death. But they would die in the process of trying to achieve their dream and trying to help Luffy achieve his dream of becoming king of the pirates, and also in this case, trying to help Momonosuke and their other friends save Wano. So there's a difference there. But, so Yamato's like, okay, well, I need to figure out a way to neutralize those bombs. And essentially what ends up happening is Yamato's like, okay, Momonosuke, you stay here. Keep trying to pull those flame clouds this way to move Onigashima away from the flower capital. I'm going to run into the island, make my way back up to the top, make my way through the castle and everything else, find my way to the bomb cache, essentially, and neutralize all of them. I'll see you later. It's like, you're on your own. Have fun. Like, Yamato just heads off. And heads off to go do that. And it's like, I'll handle the explosives. You stay here and keep pulling the island, essentially, is what's going on. So, they kind of split up for a while. We kind of cut back and forth with, checking in with Momonosuke as he's, pulling the island. And he's very focused on trying to amass as many of the small clouds as he can to eventually use it to wrap around the island and combine them with Kaido's flame clouds to start pulling them even more. So that's what Momonosuke is kind of focusing on during that time frame. As we know, Yamato does eventually find his way to where the bomb cache is, freeze all of the bombs, and then eventually Big Mom falls through. Bombs fall with Big Mom. They fall into the giant hole that Law made, and then blow up. So technically, Yamato didn't end up actually helping in that regard, but it was like, okay, well, they had to do something, or else the bombs would have gone off eventually anyway at that point in time. So, at one point in time, this is also like Law's giant sword had popped out of the island and like stabbed into the ground. Momonosuke did not notice this, and it's just like, where'd that hole come from? And like the surface of Wano was like, wait a second, where'd that hole come from? You completely missed the giant sword sticking out of the island about 5 minutes ago. So eventually, what ends up happening is, after all of that's taken care of, Momonosuke and Yamato are kind of reunited, and Yamato explains like what happened with the explosives, and it's just like, yeah, well, I froze them, and then Big Mom fell through the floor. There was also a giant sword. Don't know what happened there. She fell through the floor. The bombs went with her, and I'm assuming they got blown up in the lava. I'm not sure, but they're not a problem anymore. So moving on to the next issue, at hand. So Yamato, reunites with Momonosuke. And during this time frame, Momonosuke has actually kind of also been kind of communing with Zunisha, because like he's able to sense when Zunisha is approaching, because they can communicate with each other because of the voice of all things. And it's like, Zunisha is showing up and is like, okay, I am here to help, is kind of like talking about like what's written in the journal, because now Momonosuke has read Odin's journal and is now able to kind of ask Zunisha some questions about it. We as the reader and the watcher, in case of the anime, don't really get the full context as to what's going on, but assumedly we might get a flashback to this at some point in time. But they are discussing some of this. And Momonosuke is like, however, there was like a page ripped out of the journal. And so he's like curious about that. And then Momonosuke is also just kind of, concerned about his own misgivings, in his own abilities. He's still very worried about if he's going to be able to still live up to the expectations of his father and the expectations that the Scabbards are putting on him, and that the people of Wano are going to put on him once all this is finished. Fair. Very fair. To be fair, Odin and Toki would be so effing proud of everything that Momonosuke and Hiyori have done up to this point in time and will continue to do. They are going to be very proud. They would be so effing proud of both of them at that point in time. And the Scabbards as well. So there's a lot there. There's a lot there that goes into that. And, and it's also like, okay, should I still open the borders? Because, Momonosuke doesn't know about Pluton at this point in time yet. I don't think he knows that Pluton is under Onigashima at that point in time. Or is under Wano at that point in time. So he's still kind of like, okay, well, is it still a good idea to open the borders? I'm not sure, but maybe. So there's, like, that kind of concept there. Eventually, there ends up being one of Kaido's blasts, kind of tears through the island, interrupting the discussion. And this is when Momonosuke realizes that he can't sense Luffy anymore. And what ends up happening is, it's like, oh, well, that's not good. It's like, okay, why can't we sense Luffy? We're supposed to be able to sense him. That's not good. And that, this is when Luffy gets knocked out by Kaido again after they're interrupted by Guernica or Joseph, whatever his name was, interrupted by the CP0 agent. Where they get interrupted there. Eventually what ends up happening is they're like, oh no, that's not good. And, Kaido's, and then eventually what happens is, of course, they start feeling like the drum beat. They start hearing the drum beat, and Zunisha is like, oh, joy boy. And Momonosuke is like, wait, what? And he's very confused by that. So we kind of have that going on there where like Zunisha and Momonosuke are, talking to each other at that point in time. And like Momonosuke is kind of telling Yamato stuff too. It's like, joy boy has returned. I feel this drum beat, this presence that I haven't felt for 800 years. It's joy boy type of thing. It's like where, Zunisha is coming from with that. And, they're like, oh my God. And at that point in time, like they do start hearing the, all of the, the drum beat from Luffy and the noises from up on top of Onigashima. And they're like, what in the world is going on? And they end up, flying up. They are like, okay, let's go. The flame clouds flies up, looks down, or looks off kind of from the side. Because it's essentially like them kind of peeking over the edge of Onigashima as they're at the top of Onigashima, the skull dome, while they see what's going on. And what ends up happening is they look, and it's Luffy using all of his Toon Force crap to fight Kaido. And they're like, what the F is going on here? What is going on? Why is Luffy all white? What happened? What is going on here? And I was like, okay, we got that, but we got to get back down here because like the flame clouds are, there's more crumbling stuff. So they fly back down, grab onto the flame clouds, and just keep trying to pull it to create stronger flame clouds. Yamato's like, you got to make stronger flame clouds, Momonosuke, or this is not going to work. So that's what they're working on trying to do. What ends up happening from there is, of course, Luffy is, fighting against Kaido, and eventually he's, making his giant fist, and he's telling Momo, okay, Momo, this is my last one. I'm gonna hit Kaido. You gotta move the island. And essentially this results in several things happening at the same time. Luffy is getting ready to punch out Kaido. Hiyori is getting ready to finish facing down against Orochi in one of the areas of Onigashima, unaware of the other crap that's going on outside, up above. And Momonosuke is like, okay, I gotta move Onigashima now. And we have this moment, and I think the anime does a better part of this. I know so many of us wanted like the lanterns from Wano, from the Flower Capital, to be something that was going to get tied in here, and I really wish they had to, but it didn't happen. Maybe, I'm sure someone did that in a fanfic somewhere, but I would have loved that if those got used in this regard. But what ends up happening is Kaido is like putting all of his power into this one final, his lava dragon whatever thing attack that he's going to try to use against Luffy as opposed to dodge. And what ends up happening is that means all of Kaido's flame clouds go away. So Momonosuke has to summon up his own flame clouds. And it's the do or die moment. It's like, you have to do this, Momo, or this island is going to fall and kill everybody on it. And Momonosuke, he's remembering his parents and his sister and the Scabbards and like all of his friends and all of these people that have helped him and everything else like that. And he's just like, and it's like him summoning up his courage. And it's like, okay, I need to push past whatever mental barrier I have put on myself at the moment. I can deal with that later, but I have to push past it now. And that's what happens. And the anime does a great job of this. And he forces his power through, and he forces a ton of the flame clouds to show up, wrap around Onigashima, just in time to pull it out of the way as Luffy's fist crashes into Kaido and defeats Kaido. And, that as they clash overhead and as Kaido is hit and then falls through the hole, Momo is able to, thankfully, able to land Onigashima after that. Bear in mind, all of this is going on while a ton of other fights are happening all over and inside Onigashima. I love that. And so Momonosuke is able to land the island. Everybody inside is just like, okay, the island is landed, the fire is out, thank you Raizo and Jinbei, and all of that other stuff. So like, okay, is Kaido gone? So they're trying to deal with all of that. During that time frame, we have a moment, because, like, Luffy kind of has, like, exhausted himself at this point in time. And there ends up being a moment where Luffy, Yamato, and Momonosuke are all talking with each other. This is after, like, Luffy has, like, gone out of his gear 5th, and he's, very, very exhausted, and, like, Yamato catches him, and it's the three of them talking. And it's just like, you did great, Momo. Luffy's congratulating Momo on doing such a good job. And what ends up happening is, from there, it's like, okay, how are we going to do this? And Luffy's like, you have to tell the citizens of Wano that you guys were the ones who did this, that you guys were the ones who defeated Kaido. Yes, maybe you had help from, whoever stranger in the land helped. And that ends up being the story that they spread to the citizens of Wano, is that Luffy doesn't want credit for this, because he doesn't want to be seen as this hero. He wants to be the king of the pirates, not a hero. Although, as is pointed out, Luffy, you can try not to be a hero to a huge amount of people, including a bunch of your crewmates. You are a hero. So we kind of have that. And what ends up happening is, of course, that's the story that they spread to the citizens of Wano, is that a man called Joy Boy came and helped them defeat Kaido. Not that it was Luffy, but that it was Joy Boy. Kind of not a lie at the moment. And from there, what ends up happening is, of course, now it's time to go make their way into the flower capital. So Momonosuke, also as kind of in his discussions with Zunisha, has decided that he is not going to open the borders of Wano quite yet. But he makes his way over to the flower capital, flies over the capital in his dragon form, scaring the F out of the citizens. Eventually, they end up all kind of calming down a bit, as it's like, wait a second, oh my god, dragon! Oh wait, why is it pink? That's different. Still, dragon! And, of course, that ends up leading into Momonosuke's triumphant return and the Scabbard's triumphant return. We have, Hiyori and Denjiro come out of the smoke, and we have all of the other Scabbards that survived, along with Shinobu, are all there. They come out of the smoke, and they're all like, oh my god, and they all get their own, like, entrance poses and everything else like that, as everybody's recognizing them. And then, they kind of part, and at the end of it, we have Momonosuke standing there in his human form. Adult 28-year-old human form. And, he's in, like, Kozuki robes and everything else like that with the crest that clearly Kinemon just made all of this stuff really quickly for all of them to wear. So they have, like, the cloaks and everything. And he's got Ame no Habakiri on his hip. His father's sword that was given to Momonosuke. Where the heck they got it from at that point in time, heck if I know. And so they have all of that. And all of the citizens are like, oh my god. It's just like Denjiro's doing the whole, and I bring you the new Shogun of Wano. Kaido has been defeated. Orochi is dead. And I bring you the new Shogun of Wano, Kozuki Momonoske. They have all that great moment there. And Momonosuke is like, kind of like, okay. And he like looked at it, Kinemon, he's like, what am I supposed to do? And Kinemon does that, well, fake it till you make it, essentially, is what happens. You bluff. And so Momonosuke, he, walks through the city, and, everybody is just cheering and everything. Is just cheering, and they're all just so happy. Like, the Scabbards are all crying because they finally completed their mission of, freeing Wano from Orochi and Kaido, and, Momonosuke is now Shogun, and we have Momonosuke and Hiyori reuniting finally. And I love that. I love their reunion. Because, like, Hiyori is just like, baby brother, big brother, type of thing. They're finally reunited. And I love that. And, they're hugging, and they're all heading inside to the castle. We cut in a week later, and of course, Wano is planning for a second fire festival to celebrate the end of Kaido and Orochi. And what ends up happening is, of course, he receives a message from Hiyori running and telling him that Luffy and Zoro are awake, and then she jump kicks him in the face. which I love. And he's like, yeah, that didn't hurt for some reason. Because it's supposed to be that, like, Momonosuke, as he grew up, became, like, got a very, a lot of pain endurance, probably from their father, but also just maybe as a side effect of his devil fruit, because we know that Kaido has, like, a high pain tolerance. Can take a lot of physical damage before it really causes any problems. And they get into the area, they get into the room where Luffy and Zoro have been sleeping and recovering for the past week or so. And Luffy and Zoro do not recognize Momonosuke. And they're just like, and then Momonosuke tries to jump on Nami, and it's like, Nami, they don't like me. And then she slaps him away because he's no longer a child anymore. He's a grown-ass man. She slaps him away. And then we just have it where, like, Yamato keeps teasing Momonosuke by putting a plate on his head because it's a joke about, like, now you look more like your dad, which is just funny. And then, of course, we have Luffy and Zoro are kind of, like, looking over Momonosuke now that he's full grown, and they're like, ooh, this is fun. Ooh, let's see what you can do in a fight. And he's like, please don't. And then, of course, they have the actual, they're getting ready for the second fire festival, and they're all in the bath together, all the guys in one bath and all the girls in another bath. So we have that moment, and Momonosuke is just like, why is Yamato in here? This is not right. So we have all of that, and then of course they have like the big festival, the second festival, where they're all just celebrating and everybody's happy, and then the Green Bull prick has to show up and cause problems. And Green Bull has to show up and cause problems. Damn you, Aramaki. Aramaki shows up and is there to try to take Luffy's head. Momonosuke, along with the Scabbards and Yamato, show up and try to, are fighting against him. Momonosuke tells Yamato not to fight with them because they need to prove that they can protect Wano on their own. Otherwise, it's like, well, then the Straw Hats are going to leave anyway. And then, Yamato wants to go with the Straw Hats. And so we have, like, that's going on there. So they're fighting against Ryukogu, and Momonosuke uses his Boro Breath for the first time. And he's able to, plow through a good chunk of Ryukogu's forest and everything. But because of bullshit Logia plant reasons, he's fine. To be fair, if I had a power that was weak to fire, the way that, like, wood is, I would be like, okay, I'm going to try to figure out a way to work around this as best as possible, as quickly as possible, because that is one of my biggest glaring weaknesses, is what I would work on trying to do. Which, credit to Ryukogu, blah, 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 blah. Not that I want to. I will rather give credit to Sakazuki, to Akainu, than I will do before I give it to Aramaki. I'd rather do that. So they fight against Aramaki, and, thankfully Shanks shows up and scares the crap out of Aramaki, so he leaves. But, Raizo and Shinobu are drained of their nutrients and everything, and Yamato kind of realizes that, okay, I can't leave Wano yet. And Yamato tells, Yamato talks to Luffy and Zoro and says, okay, I'm going to stay in Wano because they kind of still need a protector because of what just happened here. It's like, yeah, okay. So they go through all of that. And then eventually we do get to the point where, they defeated that. Shanks shows up, scares the crap out of him. The next moment, my allergies are kicking in. I don't need that. Ton of crap I have to do today after this. And what ends up happening is then after the fire festival is all over, they and Momonosuke and Hiyori end up getting to meet Sukiyaki. They get to meet their grandfather for the first time, who they thought was dead their whole lives. And they get to meet him, and they're just so happy to see him again. They're so happy to know that they have another relative that's still alive, that they're not just the two of them as the Kozuki family that remains. Although, if Moria really is a member of the Kozuki clan, then they're not the only ones anyway. So they have that. And they're just like, he's like, I'm still, to the rest of the country, we'll still pretend that I'm dead. But you guys and the Scabbards know, so that's fine. So we have that. So they're just like so happy that they have him. And assumedly, Sukiyaki will work on trying to teach Momonosuke how to, possibly both Momonosuke and Hiyori, how to read the poneglyphs, and all of that. And so several days later, Momonosuke is like dealing with all of his shogun duties and everything else like that. And he's getting very tired of it. So he decides he's going to go ask Zoro to teach him some more sword techniques. And he goes to find where the Straw Hats were, and he's just like, oh, where'd they go? And he starts searching all over the castle, trying to find any of the Straw Hats. And he's not finding any of them. And him and Kinemon come across each other, and they're like, have you seen any of the Straw Hats? No, I haven't. Have you seen them? No. And they're like, they find like Hiyori and the other Scabbards, and they're like, oh yeah, they told us goodbye. They're heading off. And they're like, but they didn't tell us goodbye. And like, them and Yamato just kind of joins them. And they're just like, oh, Momonosuke turns into his giant dragon form and is like running as fast as he can with Yamato and Kinemon with him, as like Momonosuke is like angry about what's going on. He's like, wait a second, Yamato, I thought you left yet. No, I didn't leave yet. Okay, I'm confused. And they're like getting their way toward the port where the Thousand Sunny is and everything else like that, as the Straw Hats are, finishing up their preparations to depart. So they get there, and Yamato and Momonosuke have kind of had this, lengthy conversation, and Yamato is just like, yeah, I'm going to stay here in Wano for a little while. I'm going to travel around Wano for a while. Kind of like Odin did, since I've been stuck on Onigashima, the majority of my life. I like to explore Wano a bit before I head off and explore the rest of the world. Okay, so that's what happens there. What also ends up happening is they get to the beach, and Luffy is the one still standing on the shore, and I think Usopp probably saw them kind of coming and like told Luffy that they were coming. And so they show up, and Momonosuke like tackles Luffy to the ground in his human form. And it's just like, how dare you leave without saying goodbye? And he starts crying, and it's like this, it is this moment again where it's just like, you are reminded, physically 28 years old, still mentally 8 years old, and he has been around Luffy so much, and the Straw Hats so much in this time frame, and they have helped him grow so much in his courage and in his strength and in his character and everything else like that. And he is just so sad that they're leaving, and he's like angry, rightfully angry too, that they're leaving without having said goodbye to him or to Kinemon yet, as the two that have known them the longest out of all the Scabbards and out of anybody in Wano. Yamato's actually the one they've known the least. But it's like, you say goodbye to everybody else, but you didn't say goodbye to Kinemon, or why are you leaving now? And like all this other stuff. And we have this great moment there where Kinemon is just like, you're like, Luffy, or where Momonosuke is like talking to Luffy, it's like, you are like my big brother, you can't just leave me like this, type of a thing. And, he's like begging him not to leave Wano. He's just like, please don't leave yet. He's afraid of what the future might hold if Luffy's not there to help them. Which is a valid fear. But it's also, Luffy, I love this bit. This is so good. I love how they do this. And I love it because it's like, again, it's reminding you that he has an 8-year-old mind in a 28-year-old body. And he's like, I'm still worried about what'll happen to Wano if you guys aren't here to help. And at that point in time, Luffy, shouts to Usopp, who tosses him the flag, and he pulls out the flags, folds it down on the ground in front of Momonosuke, and it's just like, you keep this flag. And it's the Straw Hat flag. And you keep this flag, you put it here in Wano, and it will let anyone who shows up to Wano know that you and the inhabitants of Wano are under my protection as an Emperor of the Sea, as a Yonko. That you are my territory. And that if anything happens here, we will come here and we will fight them to protect you. And that is, Luffy gives that to Momonosuke. And I love that. like, we see the Straw Hats, all of their reactions are kind of off to the side. Like, Nami's crying at this and, like, all this other stuff as they're watching this interaction between Luffy and Momo. And it's this very cyclical thing, because, like, when Momonosuke first met Luffy, he was trying to be all arrogant and, you know, self-important and, you know, stuff like that when they were in the garbage chute. And now Momonosuke has come so far, but he's also grown so much that he doesn't mind. He's like, I don't care if I'm crying in front of you guys. You guys are my friends. You guys know who I really am. And, like, Luffy is, like, his big brother at that point in time. You know, Luffy still makes the declaration that, like, and if you or Kinemon or Yamato ever want to join the crew, you let us know and we will come here and pick you guys up. And you can come with us on our journey. And they make that deal. And I don't remember. I really wish that they hugged. I don't think Luffy and Momo hug at that point in time. But I think they, like, shake hands or whatever. And Momonosuke takes the flag and the Straw Hats all sail off. Followed by the Kid Pirates and the Hurt Pirates. And they have their stupid freaking contest of jumping off the side of Wano. And at that point in time, you know, Momonosuke, Kinemon, and Yamato are like, okay, maybe someday I will surpass my father. And so the three of them head back to the Flower Capital. And, you know, they hang up the flag. And they have, like, this, you know, they have, like, the thing in the paper where it's just, like, all of them there. You know, Momonosuke and the Scabbards and Yamato and all of them are all there in the picture. You know, ending Wano out. Just about finished with this. We have 2 more bits. So, first, we have the bits that are going on during Egghead Island, which we are currently seeing in the anime. Where we have Momonosuke. So, first we have it that when everything happened with Leloucia, with the earthquakes and everything that happened there, we do see Momonosuke that even Wano is being affected by these earthquakes and the flooding and everything else like that that's being affected around the world because of Leloucia. Then we have it that Vegapunk's message starts going off. And we have, you know, Momonosuke, Kinemon, and several others are all listening to it on one of the snails, one of the Dendenmushi that got left behind by Orochi and Kaido. So they're going through and listening to that. And, like, they're like, you mentioned Joy Boy, and the ancient weapons, and, you know, Pluton, and by this time he's probably been told that Pluton is underneath, you know, Onigashima, and that to get it, they would have to break through the walls and cause problems and stuff like that. So we have that. They listen through the message. Then we have Oni Child Yamato's Golden Harvest surrogate pilgrimage. Yamato's journey around Wano. And it's kind of bookended, or at least at the moment. We have it be that first we have Yamato, we see Momonosuke at the beginning of it, where him and Momonosuke are, like, kind of talking. We also know that during this time frame that Momonosuke has made Denjiro, Inarashi, Raizo, Kawamatsu, and Kiku the new daimyos of the other 5 regions in Wano, so that way they're all taken care of, that they're able to do their jobs in those regions. Kiku, yes. Denjiro, yes. Kawamatsu, yes. Inarashi and Raizo kind of need to step up their game. They had people getting kidnapped. So Yamato is going to go and, you know, travel around all of Wano just like Oden did. And Momonosuke is like, yeah, you have fun with that. You travel and you do that. We're going to work on a project while you're gone. Now, at the end of the story, there might still be one more chapter cover page coming from this. I'm not sure. We'll see what ends up happening. May not be quite finished yet. But what happens is, at least in the most recent one, as of the recording of this video, what ends up happening is Yamato has now returned to the Flower Capital, and it is revealed that during this time frame while Yamato was gone, Momonosuke and Kinemon have been working on building the shrine overlooking the Flower Capital to pay respect to their father, to Oden and to Toki and to the other comrades and the other warriors who died during this huge 20-some-year-long battle against Kaido and Orochi. And we have them, Yamato goes with them into the shrine, and we see them in the most recent panel, we see them all paying respects, and we see all of the lanterns with all the different names on them. So that's what Momonosuke has been working on during this time frame. Presumably, Momonosuke has hopefully also been keeping up with continuing his own training. Also probably spent a good chunk of time getting caught up with his sister, because he missed his sister. Now they're both grown up, but she's the one who actually both mentally and physically grew up. Momonosuke has just physically grown up. I mean, he's grown up mentally too, but not quite in the same way. And they've probably talked a lot and spent time talking with their grandfather and discussing different stories and talking about, the various adventures that they've been on. Stuff like that. And, gone through all of that stuff. So it'll be, we'll see what happens there. As I said, and I think I mentioned this in one of the other videos, I would have loved it if we had a moment where, Momonosuke is using Ame no Habakiri and Hiyori is using Enma, and they're fighting against, whatever enemy, and they're both using their father's swords. But of course, Zoro has Enma, and there's still always the possibility that we may still at some point in time see Hiyori wield Enma. That is quite possible, but I don't know. And what ends up happening, that would be a fun thing. But we do have the official panel, or the art that Oda drew that is at least from One Piece official, where it's Momonosuke with Ame no Habakiri and Hiyori with her fan, because that is more where her battle lies. And I really freaking hope that Momonosuke, the scabbards he has as advisors and stuff like that, he has Kanema and a bunch of the other scabbards as the daimyos and advisors and stuff like that. I'm hoping he is going to be having Hiyori also act as one of his advisors, because she would be able to give him a lot of information about what's been going on in Wano the past 20 years, along with, Hirogoro and a bunch of the others. That would be able to give Momonosuke a ton of that advice and give him lots of information as to what's been going on, who other key players are that would be able to help them, other areas that need the most infrastructure rebuilt, different things like that. And work on a ton of that stuff. So hopefully that's what's going to be happening over the course of the next, however many months and years, in the case of rebuilding Wano back up to what it could have been had Orochi and Kaido not shown up. So we kind of have that. Assumedly, what will also end up happening is eventually in the future we will have it that they show back up again. Momonosuke will show back up again. As I said, it would be very fun to have him show up and be in his dragon form first, with the scabbards and Yamato riding on his back, showing up to fight. And then he shifts and he changes into his hybrid form. So we get to see Momonosuke in his hybrid form, similar to Kaido's. And see how much stronger Momonosuke has gotten. If anything, I'm sure they can find some abandoned areas that he can go to and practice his Boro breath and maybe try to learn the wind blade scythes and some of the other stuff that Kaido was able to do. Maybe he's able to have Yamato help him with some of that, be able to be well, my dad could do this, so maybe we can try to see if that's something that you can do. Or, Dad had this technique, maybe we can find something that would be similar for you to be able to do. Just because it's a similar power, you might as well learn how to use it, even if it's in a similar way, you're using it for a much different reason than the way Kaido was using it. So hopefully that'll end up being what happens. So, that's what I have here for Momonosuke. As I said, next up is Hiyori, which I think should just be 3 videos for Hiyori, and then I'm going to be taking a break from Rulers and Leaders for a while, and I'm going to start a different series for a little while for One Piece, still One Piece related. I'm going to be going through and talking about all of the different cover page series that we have seen in One Piece over, throughout the course of the manga. Go through and talk about all of those different cover page series. So we'll see how that goes. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye!